Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today, which is going to talk about the benefits of digital related to pregnancy prevention programs. My name is Simon Ingate, and I've been working at Huron and its predecessor Pope Woodhead for about 16 years, and I've got more than 20 years of industry experience. At Pope Woodhead, which is now called Huron, I've been working in the area of risk management strategy and implementation of risk communications. And for the past 10 years, we've been dabbling in digital. And of the last 6, we've actually been implementing digital solutions around risk management. My co-speaker is Marie-Claire Wilson. Marie-Claire, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Simon. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Marie-Claire Wilson. I've got about 10 years of broad experience across the industry, consulting for pharmaceutical companies of all shapes and sizes. Before that, my background was in clinical medicine, but I haven't practiced, so don't ask me any medical questions today. I've been at Huron since March 2019, so nearly a year and a half. And I've been focusing on the digital approaches to additional risk management since joining. So working with Simon and our other colleagues who are on the call today as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So before we start, Huron, if you're not aware of the company, we're a global healthcare focused consultancy. The original company started in Chicago in 2002 with around 200 people. And since then, that's 18 years, they've grown to more than 3,500 full-time employees worldwide. And as you can see, our revenues are aiming for the billion, hopefully this year. Let's see what COVID does for us. And some of the smaller companies, of course, that have joined Huron over the years have been around for a long time. As I said, Pope Woodhead, which is a company that I came from to join Huron, was started in 1981 and was acquired just over 3 years ago. The Huron team, and that's everybody worldwide that work for us, really are very happy that we are one of the best consultancies to work for. We get to do lots of interesting work with our clients. We offer services right across life sciences, you can see, all the way to financial service, business advisory. And with our Insight partners, they look at a thing called Future Back. And essentially what that is helping clients think about where they want to be in the future and different ways of doing business, being transformational, and really developing strategies and solutions to help people realize that. So we're quite a diverse sort of business base, if you like. The people on the call today are in the sort of life sciences part of that area, and most of the people are actually working in the area of drug safety and risk management. Okay, just as a sort of background and a context to today's webinar, we've been working in risk minimization, as I said, for around about 18 years now. That's even before I joined the company. And that was involving things like writing risk management plans, implementing risk minimization, developing the tools for those, and actually getting those implemented in the countries where they need to go. And as I said, for the last 6 years or so, we've been working in delivering some of these things digitally. And the little map on the right-hand side here, where all the countries are colored in yellow, and we've just been able to add the United States to that. The reason that came in a little late was due to the fact that the way that communications are done under REMS is slightly different. And we hadn't yet had the opportunity to do that. But as you can see, we've been working with small, medium, and large pharmaceutical customers in different disease areas, quite a lot of different TAs, and with different scopes with the size of projects. So, for example, our very first project was with originally as an experiment and a pilot across Europe for a rare disease drug that then got expanded to become a regulatory commitment and has now been running for 6 years. With other customers, we're working on multiple products, on sort of digital sites for those things. And with one company, we are now beginning to look at trialing digital concepts in clinical trials. And what that will mean is that by the time the products that are being tested get into market, we will have some tried and tested risk minimization interventions even before you have to go to the regulators and tell them what you're going to do. So in terms of housekeeping, we do encourage you to ask some questions, and we'll be answering at the end of the meeting. The way to do that is with Zoom, there is a Q&A facility. If you put your questions in there, we will be monitoring that, and we'll obviously try and answer that if we've got time at the end of the meeting. If not, we'll do so after the meeting and send that via email. Just one thing is to remind you not to use the chat function because we won't be looking there. But we will remind you a couple of times as we go through the talk, you know, what you need to do. So I'm going to hand over to Marie-Claire for the first part. And Marie-Claire, please let me know when you want me to change slides.
Great, thanks, Simon. Next slide, please. Brilliant. Before I go through this at all, Simon mentioned not to use the chat function for questions, but I think we're fine to use the chat if you're having any technical issues. We did have one message that the screen wasn't visible. I'm assuming that it's probably just that one attendee. If anybody else has any problems with the technical side of things, if you can't see or you can't hear anything, feel free to pop a message in the chat on that or in the Q&A either way. We're just checking with some of our other attendees that they can see everything, and I think it is just the one participant. So hopefully you can all see what's on the screen. It's great to see so many of you here today, and I know that a number of you are experts in PPPs, that you've implemented many of these over the years successfully. We're not going to be providing you with a comprehensive review of the regulations or what the regulators are thinking at the moment. We're not going to be honing in on specific products. Where you do see products used as examples, that's just for illustration only. And we really welcome your input. At the end, we hope to have time for a proper discussion, and we've got several of our colleagues online, Mark Perrett and Steve Mayle, who you might know, and they'll be available to answer questions. We're really thinking that this webinar is a starting point for discussions on the benefits of digital for PPP. So think of it as that way. It's a starting point. It's to start some new ideas going in your brains about how PPPs could be approached. Okay, next slide, please, Simon. We'll start with a brief intro and an overview of the issues with PPPs. Then we'll look at the possible solutions that could be offered by digital. We've got some tangible next steps, and then time for discussion. Next slide, please. And the next one. Great. So I'm not going to read this word for word because I'm sure that you all know what pregnancy prevention programs are. They are, of course, a set of interventions aimed at minimizing pregnancy exposure during treatment with a medicinal product that's got known or potential teratogenic effects. We tend to think of PPPs as being associated with female patients to make sure they're not pregnant when they start the therapy, or that they don't become pregnant during the course of therapy or after stopping. But they can also target male patients. For example, when the use of a medicinal product by a male partner could have a negative effect on a pregnancy outcome, and to ensure that men using certain products do not share them with their female partners. On the right there, we've got the typical elements of a PPP, educational materials for both HCPs and patients, limiting the supply of products, controlling access to the products, and providing guidance for what might happen in certain situations. Next slide, please, Simon. Now, it's only a small number of drugs that require PPPs. This is a list of some of the drugs that require PPPs in Europe. And I'm going to make a broad generalization here and say that in the case of many of these medications, patients that are being treated with them will not be in a position to be getting pregnant or to be thinking about getting pregnant because of their age category or because they're very sick, with the exception of the top two. So valproate is used for epilepsy, for bipolar disorder, and for migraine. So they could be prescribed to a younger patient who has no other medical problems. Even more so when we think about the oral retinoids for severe acne. This could be young people, absolutely no medical issues whatsoever, and going about their lives as normal. So something to bear in mind there. There are other drugs that don't have a full PPP, but they come with a pregnancy-specific reminder card, and we've got a few examples there. Next slide, please, Simon. So we started thinking about this idea of whether there is a need for better information on drugs and pregnancy in general, rather than starting from a position of a small list of drugs which we know we absolutely mustn't use during pregnancy, and then knowing that there are drugs that are safe, and then there's a bit of a grey area, and how do we deal with all of that? What about if we turn that on its head and thought about providing reliable information about drugs in pregnancy in general? And within that, there's a section of completely contraindicated products, safe products, and products where there needs to be a decision made on an individual basis. I've included a quote here from a paper in the Obstetric Medicine Journal 2016. And the author was saying that it's the doctor who's the ultimate arbiter of whether or not a patient should take a medication during pregnancy and or breastfeeding. And she felt that there's a lack of unbiased, accurate information. And also that drug companies haven't been particularly helpful with this, because they state that pregnancy is a contraindication because they don't have the data, because they've not done clinical trials on that. If we go to the next slide, this one is so new, literally I added this in today. It turns out that the EMA agrees. I'm not going to read this out word for word. My colleague Mark, who's on the call, alerted me to this today. And the EMA are actually running a workshop in September about risks and benefits of medicines in pregnancy and breastfeeding. So they have recognised that there is limited information on the benefits and risks of medicines to the mother and child, even though half of pregnant women use at least one medicine during their pregnancy. And there are chronic conditions for which treatment's essential during pregnancy, epilepsy being one of them. And as you'll remember, valproate is on the list of those that are contraindicated. So it's a topic that the EMA is thinking of as being important. And Simon's actually going to come back to this later on when we think about possible solutions for this whole area more broadly. Next slide, please, Simon. Now, like everything in life, PPPs are not perfect. I'm using the abbreviation PPP for Pregnancy Prevention Programme. I'm hoping everybody's following along with that. It's just easier to say. We've got a few example comments from health authorities about poor compliance, lack of standardization, and there being scope for improvement. I found some comments from the literature as well. So the one on the bottom left, I found a little bit surprising. So this was from the Australasian Journal of Psychiatry, published in 2019. And the author states that review demonstrated prescription of valproate to 20% of 98 women aged between 15 and 45 with little evidence of advice regarding risk and contraception. So valproate, one of those products that are pretty much absolutely contraindicated during pregnancy, is being prescribed to women of childbearing age with no advice on risk and contraception. Then we have some other quotes, one which kind of an interesting perspective, stating this one from 2018, that there's evidence that strenuous regulation has resulted in increased awareness and increased fear of teratogenic risks, but this isn't translating into a reduced rate of pregnancies exposed to isotretinoin in this case. So something to think about. And then finally, there is a quote here that's mentioning how the high incidence of serious ADRs and the non-application of the Pregnancy Prevention Programme means that the French National Agency has limited the first prescription of alitretinoin to dermatologists only. Next slide, please. And we asked you, we did a survey ahead of this webinar, and we asked how effective are traditional PPPs in reducing exposure of pregnancies to teratogenic products. Only 25% of the respondents said that they are mostly effective. Nobody said entirely effective, because that was another option. And the other 75% of the participants have said either to some extent, not much, or not at all. So room for improvement, it would seem, according to what we've seen from the literature and also from a survey of the participants here today. Next slide, please. So why do things not work out perfectly with PPPs? Well, there are a number of areas where things can go not to plan and these interact. So from the regulator side, there can be a lack of harmonization, difficulties in collecting the right data, so it's hard to make a judgment. This trickles down to the MAHs, whose implementation of PPPs across geographies is inconsistent. And then you've got the ever-present problem of educational materials that can go out of date or for whatever reason are not fit for purpose. The healthcare professional therefore could be not aware of the risks, or they might not fully understand the risks. And you would have thought, well, that's not an issue. These are doctors, they're qualified, they'd understand what's going on. But we've seen from the previous slide with the study results how doctors are prescribing these products to patients without any evidence of advice being given at the same time. And of course, I'm sure we've all met a doctor who might be very good at their job, but in other ways, but they are not great communicators. So they're not communicating the risks to the patient. They maybe don't spend enough time on it, or they haven't made it clear what the patient needs to do. And of course, there's human error, which is generally difficult to get rid of. Similar issues on the patient side: lack of awareness of risks, lack of understanding of risks, which goes along with the bottom bullet point there about inability to apply risk to the own situation. So they might know there's a risk, they might understand what it means, but think it doesn't apply to them. They might think, well, if I was in a relationship and considering getting pregnant, I would be really careful and make sure that this wasn't going to happen whilst I was on this product, but I'm not, so it doesn't apply to me, I'm fine. Lack of understanding of the actions required, that could be another one. They don't know what they need to do in order to prevent these risks. They might not have access to contraception. The contraception could fail, and it can be simply a human error as well. So a range of things that could go wrong with a PPP. Next slide, please. And again, we asked you, what are the key factors in PPP failure? I was a little bit surprised by the results that came back. I was expecting more mentions of human error. So for each one of these factors, which are listed down the left, human error, contraceptive failure, etc., 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 we've asked whether this is a key issue, a less important issue, or not an issue. So the ones that we've highlighted with a red box are the ones where the gold part of the bar is biggest. So those are the ones where this has been highlighted as a key issue. So around 73% of responses mentioned that the PPP has not been implemented consistently was a key issue, followed by lack of regulatory harmonization and HCPs not communicating well to patients at about 63%. So those are some of the key areas where PPPs could fail, according to participants in this webinar. Next slide, please. I'll pause here very briefly just to remind you that we've got the Q&A function if anybody has any questions. So you can pop any questions or comments on there, and we will come to them at the end. So, can digital help? Yes, it can. Again, this is from you guys. Can digital improve PPP effectiveness? 73% of respondents said yes, and the other 27 didn't say no, said not sure. So definitely, this is an area that could help with PPP effectiveness. Next slide, please, Simon. So these are the issues again, that's that table. And this is how the digital methods could help. So they could help with standardization, they could help with data provision, they can help with increasing access to information, clarifying that information, providing tools to aid communication and decision making, signposting, and providing reminders. I'm going to go through this more slowly. If we go to the next slide, you can see how we've grouped these into 4 key areas. So first area is improving dissemination, and within that we've got standardizing, increasing access to information, and signposting. The next bucket is improving understanding. Within that we've got clarifying the information, presenting the information in various ways, and presenting the information in a personal manner. Changing behavior, that can be done through providing tools to aid communication, providing decision-making tools, and providing reminders. And then finally, you can use digital to monitor engagement by allowing HCPs to monitor patients. That might sound a little bit scary, but we'll come on to that later. And providing data on effectiveness. So that was one of the areas where it could be difficult to get the correct data. That's certainly something that digital can help with. Okay, next one, please. So we'll go through each one of those buckets in turn. So starting with improved dissemination and thinking about the standardization and increasing access. So Digital tools are easier to keep up to date and to distribute than paper materials. You don't have to print them out. You don't have to put them in the post. You can, at its most basic way of thinking about it, just make a few clicks and you've updated your website, or you change the PDF and now you're up to date. In terms of standardization, at Huron, we've got an approach which involves creating a core site, a template site, which has got agreed features and messaging, and that can be adapted for the local requirements. Local content is put in there in the local language, and you can also adapt for things like HCP validation requirements. So if you require a gate to allow only HCPs in, how do you validate that? Is it done against a national database or a company-specific one? And that's likely to vary from country to country. And then inclusion and exclusion of features such as knowledge checks, links to local materials, and so on. But the great thing is you've got a core site with core features that have been agreed in advance and the core messaging and branding. So that's one way that digital can help with standardization. Okay, next slide. Websites and apps are great for providing signposting, and also they are available 24/7. You can access them to a variety of devices. You know, we've got busy healthcare professionals. They will be able to access this sort of thing on the go, on their mobile devices, on their tablets. We know that many of our clients have mentioned that they've had issues with the COVID-19 pandemic when it comes to getting materials into hospitals. So if you've relied on a local representative taking paper materials in and going to sit down with a doctor, but this is something that can be overcome by digital. So it's no contact. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about things getting stuck in the post. You don't have to worry about somebody telling your local representative that they can't come into the hospital. And it's very easy to link digital assets together. Again, at its simplest level, this could be just having a resources page with links and downloads. That's a lot easier for the end user than having sheafs and sheafs of paper, different bits and pieces, different leaflets, different brochures, all with different fonts and brands, and they could end up not knowing what they need to go for what. So good for availability and good for facilitating signposting. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're on to the improve understanding section now. Digital gives you the opportunity to use diverse communication methods, and it provides options for simplification. You can break up text, you can use animations, video and audio to make sure that the information consumption preferences of all the users are catered for. So this is an example below. This is a screenshot of the patient advice leaflet for valproate. I don't know if it's the latest one. There's a reference in the bottom as to where it comes from. It was updated last in November 2019. So this is just as an example. You can see there's a lot of text on there, quite small. You can break that up. You can add icons. You can use bold. You can use tabs. You can have what are called concertinas, where there's a little box that you click on and that shows text. Of course, you can do some of that with paper. You could easily break up what's on the left-hand side and put it in bigger text and put some icons next to it. But you need to have a very big leaflet if you were going to do that. Whereas on a website, the experience is different. How you interact with the information is different. You're fine to click through things or to open and close things. So it's just easier on the eye. It feels easier to digest. And then if you add in the animations and the videos, you've really got a very different experience than just reading a page of text. Okay, next one. Okay, so you can use simple approaches to help create a relevant and engaging user experience. You don't have to do anything overly technical or frightening with collecting data at all. You can actually use a flow of questions to create something that feels more personal. Q&A answers, question and answer format is also a nice way of doing that. Having a knowledge check where patients or HCPs can go through a list of questions and they can build their knowledge that way, rather than feeling that they have to sit in front of a whole screen of text. And then you can direct users to information that's directly relevant to them. At Huron, we've implemented these types of features for a number of clients. As a little example here, now I'm sure that there are apps out there that go alongside contraceptive pills or other forms of contraception and operate in a similar way. This is just an example, just to show you how it might work. So first question could be, are you using contraception to stop you from getting pregnant? And then depending on whether you answer yes or no, it will take you down a particular pathway. So if the user says no, it's then asking, why aren't you using contraception? And the options here is maybe a little bit small on the screen, include, I don't know why I need it. I don't think I can get pregnant anyway. I don't like using it, or another reason. And then based on what they select, that can then direct the user to relevant information. Also, if you wanted to implement this sort of thing, it could alert their HCP. So the HCP is then alerted to the fact that this person who should be using contraception isn't, because they don't think they can get pregnant for whatever reason. If they are using contraception, it checks what type of contraception they're using. And again, this could help to alert an HCP, if you wanted to do that, about the fact that they're not using something that's considered to be effective. For example, they might think that the withdrawal method is a form of contraception and it's fine for them. But in a situation where you have a pregnancy prevention program running, that wouldn't be the case. So just simple approaches without collecting any data just makes it a little bit more engaging. Next slide, please. Now, if you wanted to go a bit further and collect small amounts of data, which would be optional for the user, so we're not forcing them into providing this, it could be locally stored, so it wouldn't need to be shared with the pharmaceutical company or with anyone else. This could really allow some tailoring. Even if you ask simple, relatively lower sensitivity questions such as age and sex, this would allow you to tailor knowledge check questions, for example. So think of yourself as your own situation when you're interacting with something online. If you feel that it's aimed at someone like you, someone within your age group, you're probably more likely to feel that it's relevant and to want to engage with it. So if we have a young person, we'd have a knowledge check question that it features a young person. And similarly, someone middle-aged or older, you tailor the knowledge check appropriately. Now, for the as far as sex is concerned, you'd obviously want to deliver completely different content if it was a male patient. And then there's a discussion about whether you'd want to have a completely different app or website for male patients. But that's just one way that you can use some small amounts of locally stored data to really tailor that. Not proposing here that some people wouldn't see all of the risk minimization material that's there. They wouldn't get all the information. They would. It could just be a question of tweaking how the knowledge check appears or presenting information in a different order, but still making sure that everybody gets all of the important information that's been ticked off. Okay, next one, please. So we're now onto the change behavior segment. We all know how it can be quite frustrating if you're in a doctor's office and the doctor is looking at the screen and not interacting with the patient. But it is possible for digital tools to support the HCP and patient discussions and also HCP decisions. If you provide HCPs with materials that they can talk through with the patients whilst they're in the office or over Zoom, I know that my own GP practice is doing a lot of remote consultations at the moment, so I'm sure that's the case in other areas, but they've got something that they can use to spark a discussion. This could be support for difficult conversations, videos that explain the concept of risk, which is really tricky for all of us humans to grasp, and signposting, including to information in other languages. And also, if you do decide to go down the road of having some degree of information provision between patients and their doctors, you could have patients fill in a questionnaire before their consultation, and the doctor would then know what to focus on. They might know that the patient is fully conversant with the risks and how they might be impacted, but they're not sure about what contraception would be best. So you can hone in on that as a doctor. So that's one way that digital can support these discussions and the HCP decisions. Next slide, please. Reminders and checklists are great for supporting behavioural change, as no doubt you've seen yourself if you have any kind of monitoring app, whether it's a fitness app or a calorie counting app. We could have a checklist for HCPs, that's shown as an example on the left, where they would need to tick each of those points. They've discussed the risks with the patient, they're satisfied that the patient understands the risks, they've explained the need for contraception, and they've checked that the patient is using an effective form of contraception. Those are all the areas that they'd need to go through. We could even have a gate that they would then need to complete all of those before they could prescribe. Similarly, for a patient, you can have reminders. In this case, it's showing take the contraceptive pill. And again, no doubt there are apps out there that already do that, but you could have other things. You could have remember to book your appointment for the contraceptive injection or so on. So good ways for keeping those reminders close to the patient or the HCP at all times. Next slide, please. And again, coming back to how the digital methods can strengthen that relationship, you could have an HCP prescribing access to an app, or as I'd already mentioned, they provide information, the patients provide information ahead of the consultation. So we have done this sort of thing for clients already, and there are many possibilities for taking this further where that's permitted and where it's desired. So it's a very, very interesting area. I mean, even just HCPs having a patient dashboard where they can see what pages have been viewed and which materials have been downloaded. Next one, please. Okay, and all stakeholders can benefit from the data that's provided by digital interactions. Even simple types of data like the pages visited, time spent on the page, what they've downloaded, feedback on the site, and the knowledge check responses. Insights into user friendliness and usefulness of elements can help to improve the design and functionality. So ultimately, that's benefiting the user. They obviously want a site or an app that's easy to use and that provides a nice experience. And HCPs can monitor patient activity and their understanding of key topics through this sort of data provision. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does this all mean? I know that some questions have been coming through, so thank you for that. We will we'll look through those, and very shortly we'll move on to that discussion. But we've got a couple of slides before we go. If we'd have the next slide, please, Simon. So what does it mean for everybody on the call? What could you do next if you're interested in this area? If you're running a PPP and it's paper-based, but you know that there are digital solutions for additional risk minimization, other areas of your organization, think about what you could reuse. Could you use a similar platform? You'd also need to consider which geographies might lend themselves to being effective pilot projects, look at the regulatory environment, the size of the market, and how motivated your local colleagues are. And then, of course, the products and populations that would be most appropriate. Next slide, please.
Okay, I think this is where I take over again.
It is indeed, yeah. Simon.
Thank you, Marie-Claire. That was a lot of talking there. So I've only got about 4 or 5 slides to go through, so we are nearly to the Q&A section. So again, as we had in the pre-webinar survey, for those people that took part, we asked people to provide their experiences and perspectives on pregnancy prevention programs. And as part of that, we asked some questions about whether digital PPP apps for patients could be useful and what you thought the barriers to that might be, because this is kind of a new thing for industry to think about and regulators to think about. It was, hang on a minute, why would we do this? Why would we want to have a single app? So when we asked the question, did you think it was a good idea to begin with? People were saying, well, yes, we do. We think it would be useful. The idea that we've been mooting there with the with the survey was this would be initially independent of any particular medicine. But we did ask the question, and do you think we'll be able to do that? And feedback has been that actually people feel that the app might need to include specific information. So with that in mind, what we have been thinking about, so as you've seen with our experience with working across the world with digital risk minimization, we think that this is quite a good idea. We can see the advantages of digital to patients that are on any sort of generic pregnancy prevention program. And what we're interested in is we believe that a single site, if you like, or an app for any patient on any pregnancy prevention program would be really useful for those end users. What would that do? I mean, instead of many companies developing their own advice on pregnancy prevention, which is all usually pretty generic, as in use the right forms of contraception, tell your doctor if you're thinking of getting pregnant, tell your doctor if you did get pregnant, make sure you get your pregnancy test done, and all that kind of thing. It's no different, irrespective of the drug you're on, actually. Obviously, there are some differences with the different kinds of patients, male patients that may have sexual partners that could get pregnant, for example. But what this would also help out with is the confusion that's been highlighted. If you remember some of the quotes from earlier, there's the EMA criticism in the slide that has just been added today, that there is no single generic pregnancy prevention program in Europe. It makes you think that maybe they're thinking that that should be something that is done there as well. So really what we're looking at is sort of a single source of truth, if you like. So the scope of the app would initially be providing generic pregnancy prevention guidance. So how to prevent pregnancy, what we do in case of a pregnancy, and how do you protect the developing fetus. The site would be available to all drugs where fetal exposure is considered a risk. And there may be, as the survey respondents have mentioned, the need to include that additional information on specific drugs. For maximum utility across the territories, obviously we are based in Europe. Whenever we do risk minimization across Europe, we are doing that in all the languages that you would need to have it across all the countries in Europe. So, you know, deliver that in a multilingual format. And one of the pieces of technology in the platform that we've developed allows us to do that. So you can create your core data and then add in all the translations. Wherever you are, if you're in France, you're going to get it in French. If you're in Belgium, you could get it in French, German, or Dutch, actually. So users of the app will be able to access the advice and guidance on a pregnancy prevention program. They could define their sort of profile. So what sex are you, what age? If there is sort of different dosing for drugs, you might want to add things like weight. Now, we do know that in Europe and other countries, you know, sort of data protection is a big issue here. So the idea would be that that sort of data would actually be held locally, either in a cookie in a website on somebody's machine, or if you're using sort of mobile technology, it will be on that technology. So that's something that is personal to the patient, doesn't go anywhere else. All it is used for is to tailor their experience of the information that's on there. So additional information, as Marie-Claire has alluded to, could include things like reminders to use contraceptive pills or to get your pregnancy test, and to store this information potentially so that it can be shared with their treating physician. So for example, if you needed to prove once a month that you have got a negative pregnancy test, one thing you could do is pop down to the pharmacy, pick up your pregnancy test, do your pregnancy test, and take a photograph of the result. That can be stored on your phone. You can go to your doctor, you can show them, there you go, doctor can give you a prescription. So that's the sort of thing that would be really useful for patients. Obviously, if you've got tens of different apps rather than just the one, that's going to get confusing for people. Which one do I use? So as Marie-Claire mentioned, that the inclusion of knowledge checks, and especially these tailored ones, they could be really useful to help patients understand what it is that I have to do to make sure that I am compliant with pregnancy prevention as related to me. So, you know, that will help really help with compliance in terms of making sure the individual does what they're expecting to do. I did mention that we did speak about some barriers to that. So we did say, okay, well, you know, it'd be great to be able to do that. Where do you think that this might not work? And it was quite surprising that people were saying, actually, there's things like bureaucracy or lack of awareness of the existence of the apps. Now, and also sort of company competitive mindsets is, this is our pregnancy prevention program and we're going to do it like this. Well, the drug information is yours, but telling people that they should be using contraception and not getting pregnant, and if they do get pregnant, going to a doctor, I'm not sure that belongs to a particular company. And I think all of the things that were mentioned really are all things that are easy to solve. To create a single source for truth. Actually, there was one thing that we did last week, a week or so ago, was the European EMA, the European DIA, and there was a talk on patient engagement, and we asked a question: if a company or an organization wanted to deliver generic advice to patients, and we were quite broad with this, we said for things that are quite common that happen with drugs, things like risk of PML, the need for vaccination before you're allowed to take the drug, pregnancy prevention, and that was good advice to patients, and that was giving out there, irrespective of the drug. How would the regulators feel about that? And one of the speakers in that particular session was from the FDA. And she said, as long as that advice is correct and it's saying the right things, the FDA and other regulatory authorities wouldn't have an issue with it. In fact, they would probably encourage it. And as you saw, the EMA later in the year, in September, are having this meeting to look at pregnancy prevention programs. And that could be one of the subjects is, wouldn't it be great if you just had one? So this is something that's of real interest to us. And what we would like to do is, if there are any people on the call today that would be interested perhaps in collaborating in a pilot or a proof of concept, and really to begin with, it'd be something like looking at what might that app need to contain, who do we need to go and convince to use that as a single source of knowledge, single source of truth for people. We'd really like to hear from you. So if, as you can see, we've got our contact details here. So please, if this is of interest to you or your company, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll see what we can do if we get some interest. So I think that is the end of the talk for today, and we do have some questions to answer. Now, I'd just like to introduce a couple of people that have been listening in. So we have Steve Mail, who's one of our experts in risk management. He's been on and off with Pope Woodhead even longer than I have. It must be about 20 years now. And then Mark Perrault as well, who is actually is the head of our group, of all the people that have been talking today. So Marie-Claire, I think you were going to ask the questions of people.
Yeah, thanks everybody for submitting questions. I'll just go through them in the order that they were submitted. So the first question was, is there any effort between FDA and EMA or other authorities to harmonise risk mitigation strategies, share results, etc.? Mark, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I'll have a go at that. I'd certainly, at the moment, to my knowledge, if anything, there's divergence and continuing divergence. There may well be some initiatives that are not desperately visible in relation to the sharing of, learnings and experience in these fields. But to be honest, we're not aware of that. And to be honest, even at the European level, although obviously the risk management plan is approved by EMA, the risk minimization materials are a local health authority accountability. And so we do see a small amount of variation in the way that those different health authorities look at the content of digital risk minimization tools. I mean, wherever there is local accountability for the specifics of a design or the specifics of the content, we do find a certain amount of variation in the precise wording and so forth. Frankly, I would say today, with our experience, and we've rolled out quite a number of tools now using digital media. This is typically websites, dynamic websites, although we're about to move into an application space quite strongly with several projects. We tend to build a core tool on which we try to get customer feedback so that we do at least 1 or 2 rounds of improvement or co-design with actual users before those tools go live. So we have that core design, and then we look for the local markets involved within the company that we're working with to do localization and translations, as they would with the old paper process. Even there, we do tend to find that the health authorities in Europe will request some minor variations one to the other. Frankly, our experience is that those variations never really add anything to the understandability, the dynamics, the functionality of the material. They tend to be very, very minor, frankly, almost change for change's sake in some cases. And I think we're seeing the, a representation of frequently of often individual preference. It's fine. The systems and the processes we have in place will accommodate that, but it's not very, it's not necessarily something that that really smooths the process or leads to greater international consistency. So no, at the moment, I think FDA and EMA have quite different approaches in this situation. Of course, most of the world follows the EMA approach, with the FDA being something of an outlier. We know that the FDA are interested in closer ties between REMS programs and the healthcare system, for example, which is, I think, something that could be applied at a country level a bit more strongly in other markets too. But no, that's unfortunately at the moment we expect to continue with a range of different approaches in different territories. Thanks, Marie Claire.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Okay, next question. Could you use this app only for PPPs, or could it be extended to also other type of additional risk minimization materials for other risks? I think the answer to that is definitely could extend it to other areas. It's something that we've been doing at Huron. We work on this area. Simon, or anybody from the team, would you want to?
I'm going to go back a slide off you. Yeah,
okay.
let me just go. Yeah, so as I said at the beginning, we've been working with some companies, as you can see, quite a few there. We've not got names, obviously, for commercial and confidence. There were a couple of questions, actually, that probably is answered by this slide. So we have developed a digital platform that we have. It can be used for lots of other things. We've used it for post-authorization safety study surveys with healthcare professionals and patients in different languages. But the main focus of our work is risk management, risk minimization, education, and all of these, which is coming up to about, it's getting close to like 10 different drugs for different companies, maybe more now. It's actually focused on the risk minimization. So there's any kind of communication. So it doesn't have to be PPP. And it's in lots of different languages as well, so it's all over territories. The color on the slide as well kind of answers another question that somebody asked, which was about, have regulators approved these? With all of these companies we've been working with, one of the processes is with risk minimization is to go to the local health authority and get the approval. And what we have done, we've actually developed also some sort of dialogue to help the local companies speak to health authorities about delivering this in a digital way. So wherever you can see a nice orange to gold colored country, that's where so far we've been successful in implementing. And you can see that's the whole of Europe. There are some exceptions. Sometimes you do get some paternalistic societies where they say, we only want doctors to talk to their patients. We don't want patients to be communicated with directly. But that's a very small number of countries. Marie-Claire.
Great. Thanks, Simon. I think, as you say, that hopefully answers several of the questions that have been posted about how this sort of technology could be used, the different forms. So there was a question here about whether we use apps as well. Yes, we have implemented apps with clients. I think, yeah, hopefully that covers many of those. There were a couple of questions here about
sorry, just jumping in. I think Nicholas's question was, he asked two and then clarified. He asked about whether there were regulations in place and really thinking about apps as opposed to the websites, which is where we started in this process. I think essentially in relation to apps, the regulations are really no different to those for websites, which is that there are some local country level regulations that are kind of being drafted. They do tend to change quite a bit. And obviously that most countries have not written anything specific in this area. The biggest one is the usual question is that would an app be regarded as a medical device, which obviously in some cases can add a little bit of extra complexity, although in most cases apps as a medical device are, you know, they can be essentially self-certified. It's actually not a big process, and we have done that, although not in risk minimization. We've done it to support things like dose calculators, which would be an app for dose calculation. Usually the point at which it starts to become a medical device is if there is disease tracking or disease management within it. And typically in a pure risk minimization sense, you might not do that, although one of the areas we're very interested in is whether in risk minimization to actually ensure that patients and healthcare professionals perceive the real value of using these materials, and therefore in interacting with them more often are more exposed to the messages and understand the messages better. That we really ought to be looking at providing a full package for them. In other words, you know, a range of services that they would find valuable, and not necessarily only the risk minimization. That of course is a little tricky in that the EMA GBP specifically kind of excludes the connection of marketing activity, promotional activity, and I think that's the point at which the line becomes a little bit grey, because for things like lots of functionality has been associated with marketing activity like compliance support, but actually it's all part of the risk management package.
Oh, I think we might have lost
Mark there. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Steve, did you want to contribute on the question around regulation?
Yes, I could just add further to Mark around the subject of medical devices. So whether the app would qualify as a medical device, that would depend very much on what information was being presented and how it was being presented. So what is the purpose, and for example, would it be some sort of decision support tool, and would there be reliance on data in order to guide those decisions, and would the HCP or patient see those decisions? If it did actually qualify as a medical device, it would be the simplest type. So within Europe, that would be class 1. You would need to get a CE mark, but as Mark mentioned, it's a very straightforward process, so it's not really adding any significant burden.
Great. Thank you, Steve. A couple of other questions. Let's have a look. We've looked at regulations. Data protection, Steve or Simon, is there anything you wanted to add to that? I mean, the thing is, would we...
Yeah. So we've been working on this, like I said, for 6 years, and that's always been a bit of an issue that each company asks about. And in fact, quite often the health authorities will ask you about that, is how do you protect the identity of patients? Quite often, for some of the risk minimization that we have delivered, everything that comes from a patient is anonymized. So that means we don't actually know who that patient is. That means we're not asking patients to log on, so we're not collecting any information about who that patient is. And as I was saying earlier, and I think Mary Claire also alluded to, for this kind of application, let's say we talk about pregnancy prevention today, is that the idea would be that anything that is identifiable as belonging to a patient, if you're not collecting it, as in it's being used for how the application itself or the website works, is that is stored locally on the patient's device. So it could be on their phone as a sort of a preferences section. It could be in a cookie that says, okay, I'm a female, I'm aged 25, I'm not in a relationship, if that was one of the things that you're using as part of the pregnancy prevention program. Then that data isn't actually collected. It's local. Now, if you needed to collect any specific data about a patient, then you need to apply GDPR rules, particularly in Europe. So that is, and that will involve including on the sites things like letting people know what their rights are, what data is collected, how's it going to be used, how's it going to be retained, and what you're going to do either when the patient wants to remove themselves from the site or the data is no longer being used. So there are rules, particularly in Europe, GDPR, but what we're saying here, for the activity of the application itself in pregnancy prevention, you needn't actually collect any data from the patient themselves that identifies them as a specific person.
Thanks, Simon. A couple of other questions. Hopefully we can get to these before we close. One question, other than mandating the use of an app within a PPP, what are some approaches that would be used to promote patient HCP engagement with these electronic resources? We've covered a couple of those within the presentation, thinking about how you could have the HCP prescribing access to the app, the HCP having a patient dashboard so they can see what patients have been doing. They can see whether they've downloaded the materials that they'd want them to read. They can see how they've answered the knowledge check questions. There's that kind of offline interaction, and there is an opportunity to take that further and they have the patient reminded to fill in a short questionnaire before their next consultation, and the doctor could get that ahead of time. Simon, Mark, is there anything you wanted to add to that about how these digital approaches could improve engagement between patients and HCPs?
I don't know if I'm properly back now, but hopefully
I
mean, it's a great question. What I would say that we've probably one of our biggest lessons in this whole area. When you say patient/HCP engagement, I mean, clearly there is that ability to support the discussions between the patient and the HCP. But I think more broadly, there is the question of how do you, having put the effort into developing these great tools, ensure that they actually are used and used appropriately. And I think, I think more effort and more focus is required on that local implementation step. I think consideration of a wider range of options perhaps than sort of the Dear HCP letter and including a QR code on the printed version of the materials, really need to be considered. And I think at the moment the sort of default position is that the HCP would introduce the patients to these tools, and oftentimes it's terribly important that the patient does have that understanding about the risks and how to mitigate them. And I do think there's a bigger role that we could play with patient organisations and even patient-to-patient, kind of mentoring and advice exchange and so forth. But clearly we need to make sure that there is trust in the information that we're providing through these materials as well. And again, I think, perhaps one of the things that I'd quite like to see is perhaps, sort of a standard mark that shows that these materials have been approved by a health authority or they're regulated in some fashion, just to kind of show that they have that kind of weight of consideration behind them.
Great, thank you, Mark. One more. So question here from somebody who runs pregnancy registries in the US. The FDA is asking more and more that these studies are global. Our current understanding of the regulations is that we're not allowed to reach out to patients directly via telephone or email. Is that your understanding as well? Mark, Simon, anything you wanted to?
It might be one for Steve. I mean, I think we would tend to agree because a registry is a study. So the study is likely to be coordinated by investigators or by, so if you've got a patient that you want to include in your registry, they're going to come in through their doctor, basically. And there will be a consenting process there. Now, one of the things that might be, you could ask, it's always good to ask regulators because quite often we get companies that assume that you're not allowed to do things. And if you ask the regulator and say, well, why would you want to contact a patient directly through a registry? And if you've got a good reason for it and the regulator can see that, then you may be surprised by the answer. They may actually say, actually, that makes sense, put it in the protocol. But a registry is a study. I don't know, Steve, if you want to answer anything to that.
Yes, I'd agree. Yeah, typically, I mean, it varies from country to country in terms of regulation, but typically it wouldn't be the pharma company going directly to the patient. So it would usually be via a third party, such as the healthcare provider, in order to do that. And that would also apply in the case of apps, as Mark mentioned, typically getting the healthcare professional, doctor or nurse, to introduce the patient to the app.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. It's now past, and I think we have got through pretty much all of those questions. If you did submit a question and it wasn't answered, please feel free to email Simon or myself or both of us, and we can get back to you via email. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. Simon, over to you to close.
Okay, yeah, I think that was just to repeat the same. I did see one about religion, and not that we decided not to answer that one, but I think that's a very interesting question. Is there are differences in pregnancy beliefs that would need to be thought about. So if we were to, as I said, we are interested in this concept of getting the single source of truth for a pregnancy prevention application for patients irrespective of drug initially. So if you are interested in that, please let us know. And that could be one of the things that we need to look at is what do you do if there are different religious beliefs or sort of different ways of different kinds of contraception across different countries, because you go to different countries and they do different things. So you would have to do some localization there. So that's quite an interesting thing to think about. And as Marie Claire said, if you are interested in perhaps moving this ahead, and we would be talking, in fact, we're talking to the FDA this afternoon about something related to digital, but not quite this, then, we'd be happy to hear from you. I think that's everything. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking part. And I'll now close down the meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all.